Have you ever noticed how some people seem to have an almost supernatural control over their surroundings without saying a single word? They don't scream. They don't beg. They simply withdraw. And suddenly, everything changes. The energy shifts. People begin to question, to feel the absence. But with you, it seems the opposite. Your constant presence, your easy yes, have transformed you into part of the landscape. People no longer see you. They just use you. And every bit of your energy you give away is another brick in your own invisible prison. You long, deep down, to feel that your value lies not in your usefulness. You want the freedom to be who you are, not what others need you to be. Today, Carl Jung will show you that to break these chains, you don't need more strength, but less presence. You will understand that your retreat is not an escape, but the rediscovery of your center, the place where no one can control you anymore. Since childhood, you were taught to be a safe harbor, a virtue, they said. Always being there, responding promptly, offering a shoulder even before a tear falls. But no one warned you of the hidden cost of this virtue. No one explained to you that a port that is always open to all ships at any time ceases to be a valuable destination and becomes a mere passage. The ships dock, replenish their energy with yours, and depart, never truly seeing you. And you remain, with the dock increasingly worn. Carl Jung understood this dynamic not as kindness, but as a flaw in the foundation of the psyche. He would call it a hypertrophied persona. The persona is the social mask we wear to be accepted and recognized. But what happens when the mask merges with the face, when your role as available savior becomes your sole identity? You abandon yourself. And this self-abandonment is subtle, happening with every yes you say meaning no, with every message you respond to with a heavy heart. Their prison doesn't have iron bars. It's built on the guilt of saying no and the paralyzing fear of disappointing. This architecture of submission wasn't born yesterday. It was built from the earliest days. Society and family function based on a principle of cooperation that is often a veiled form of conformity. The child who suppresses their desires in favor of group harmony is praised. In contrast, the one who expresses their needs assertively is labeled selfish. And so, the lesson is internalized. To receive love, one must erase a part of oneself. What begins as a childhood survival mechanism solidifies into an adult way of life. You become an expert at reading the environment and anticipating others' needs to avoid friction. An emotional chameleon. But the chameleon, by blending into the landscape, pays the price of invisibility. They are not seen for who they are, but for their ability to remain inconvenient. Jung would say that the persona should be like a wardrobe. You choose the appropriate clothes for each occasion, but you know who the naked person is underneath. The problem arises when you forget you're wearing clothes and believe it's the uniform. Your identity dissolves into the roles you play, and they all share a common script. Unconditional availability. The tragedy is not the performance, but the amnesia. The loss of contact with the authentic self. This self has desires, limits, and anger. But these facets are inconvenient for the character you've built, so they are repressed, relegated to the dark basement of the psyche, what Jung would call the shadow. What remains on the surface is an edited, pleasant, and deeply exhausted version of yourself. Exhaustion isn't physical. It's a fatigue of the soul. It's the exhaustion of sustaining a continuous performance. Your life becomes a long negotiation between what you feel and what you believe you should feel. And in this negotiation, your truth always loses. Your prison isn't external. No one has chained you. You hold the key. But the fear of opening the cell is the fear of discovering who you are without the approval of others. It's the fear of being free, and in freedom, finding solitude. It's the fear of disappointing those who have grown accustomed to your voluntary servitude. You remain not for lack of strength, but for lack of courage to face the vastness of the sky outside. The first step to liberation isn't an action, but a sharp realization. Your kindness has become a sophisticated form of self-abuse. Your availability isn't love, but fear in disguise. Existential philosophy, in the words of thinkers like Nietzsche, warns of the danger of herd morality, the human tendency to adopt behaviors that guarantee group acceptance, even if it means sacrificing one's own individuality. Your excessive availability is a perfect manifestation of this morality. You act not from an inner conviction, but from a deep fear of being exiled from the herd. Your constant yes is not generosity, but a renunciation of your right to exist as a sovereign individual. Every time you give in, you are telling the world and yourself that the needs of others are more legitimate than your own, that their peace is more important than your own. What you call empathy is often an inability to draw a healthy boundary between yourself and others. You absorb others' problems and responsibilities as if they were your own, not out of nobility, but because you don't know where you end and the other begins. This emotional fusion is a recipe for burnout. You become a dumping ground for the world's emotional waste, a passive receptacle that never gets a chance to process its own emotions. The paradox is that the more you give of yourself indiscriminately, the less valued you become. People no longer respect you for it. They simply expect it of you. Your availability becomes a commodity, a guaranteed resource, and like any seemingly infinite resource, it is exploited without consideration. You become reliable, but not desirable, predictable, but not fascinating, useful, but not loved for who you truly are. What you get in return is functional dependence. People need you, but they don't want you. They want what you provide: relief, validation, a quick fix. The moment you stop providing this, the illusion shatters, and the true nature of the relationship reveals itself. The question you need to ask yourself isn't why others abuse your goodwill. The real question is, what do you gain by allowing this abuse? What are you avoiding by keeping yourself occupied with other people's lives? The answer, often, is the emptiness of your own existence, the difficulty of facing your own fears and unfulfilled dreams. Being the savior of others is a convenient distraction from having to save yourself. And so, the cycle perpetuates itself. You continue to give away your energy, not because you have plenty, but because the act of giving prevents you from looking at your own inner poverty. The journey to breaking this pattern begins with an act of sacred selfishness, the decision to withdraw your energy from the external world and direct it inward. It's not about becoming indifferent, but about becoming the guardian of your own temple. It's understanding that you cannot serve water from a dry well. And the first step to replenishing that well is to stop allowing everyone to quench their thirst from it without permission, without reciprocity, and without respect. It's an act of withdrawal, a movement inward, which will feel strange at first, but it is in this retreat that true power resides. It's the silence that precedes the storm of transformation. Think about your phone. It's not just a metal and glass device. It's a direct portal to your vital energy, and to the world. It's become the remote control for your attention. Every notification that vibrates in your pocket isn't a simple alert. It's a summons, a test of your loyalty, a demand disguised as a request. It's the sound of your sovereignty being challenged. And you answer. You always answer. Let's dissect this scene, for it's a microcosm of your entire life. It's that friend, the one you always have, who only emerges from the shadows when their world collapses. Their message arrives with a weight of urgency that makes you stop everything. It's not a dialogue, it's a monologue where you serve as audience and repository. They pour out the same stories, the same dramas, the same complaints, expecting you to abandon your own plans, your own peace, to validate their chaos. You listen, you advise, you comfort, and when their storm passes, they disappear, leaving you with the emotional hangover of a pain that wasn't yours. He's not a bad person. He's just a man who learned that his time has no gate. It's that family member who, under the cloak of love and duty, delegates emotional responsibilities that aren't yours. They see you as the rock of the family, the unshakable pillar. But a rock doesn't feel, and you do. You feel the weight of being the mediator of conflicts you didn't create, the confidant of secrets you weren't asked to keep, the crisis manager everyone else avoids. They assume your strength is a natural, inexhaustible resource, like the air they breathe. It doesn't occur to them that every intervention, every word of comfort, every decision you make for them is a piece of your own life that you're sacrificing on the altar of family harmony. And the love you receive in return is conditioned by your role. The day you falter, the day you say, "I can't," you won't be seen as human, but as a flaw in the system that has always served them. It's the coworker who orbits your desk, drawn by the light of your creativity. They arrive with vague questions, praise your ideas, make you feel smart and needed. You, in your desire to be useful, to collaborate, share your insights, design the solution, hand over the treasure map. A week later, at the board meeting, you watch silently as they present your idea as if it were a stroke of genius. And they don't even look you in the eye, because in their mind, they haven't stolen anything. They've simply plucked a fruit that was there, available, dangling from a low branch. They're not monsters. They're just people who, consciously or unconsciously, have decoded your pattern. You always give in. You react. And it's in this automatic reactivity that their invisible control over you resides. You're not being controlled by chains, but by silken threads, so thin you don't even feel them, yet so strong they keep you exactly where they want you. Carl Jung, when mapping the human soul, saw it not as a machine of logical reactions, but as a delicate and powerful system of psychic energy. Your mind, your emotions, your attention, all of this is libido in the Jungian sense, the energy of life. And this energy is finite. Every word you waste justifying yourself to those who don't want to understand you, every minute of sleep you lose thinking about how to please those who don't value you, every gesture of help you offer out of obligation rather than genuine desire is a hemorrhage in your life force. By reacting, you're not just responding to an external stimulus, you're chaining yourself to the other person's power dynamics. You're handing them the end of the string that moves your internal puppet. A person who lives chronically drained isn't weak. Their energy is simply being diverted to infertile ground. And those who live exhausted become psychologically porous and vulnerable. Vulnerability, in the silent game of human relationships, is a scent that attracts predators. Not predators with teeth and claws, but predators of souls. Opportunists, veiled narcissists, emotionally immature individuals, they all have a keen sense of exhaustion in others. They smell your inability to say no. They know instinctively that you lack the strength to establish a clear boundary and stick to it. They know that their old friend, guilt, will step in to make you back down at the first attempt at rebellion. They don't need to force the door to your psyche. They simply wait for you to betray yourself once again, leaving the key under the mat. They knock, and you open, not because you want a visit, but because you've been conditioned to believe it's your obligation to be hospitable, even if the visitor comes to plunder your inner peace. Let's delve deeper into the anatomy of this betrayal. It's not an event. It's a process. It begins with a small concession. Just this once, you tell yourself. You cancel a personal plan to help someone. You reply to a work message late at night to appear proactive. You lend someone much-needed money so as not to appear stingy. Each of these decisions, taken in isolation, seems harmless, but they are seeds, and they grow. Today's concession becomes tomorrow's expectation, and tomorrow's expectation becomes the day after's demand. Without you realizing it, you've set a precedent. You've taught the world exactly how they can and should treat you. You've become the author of your own instruction manual for abuse. And the world, being a diligent learner, follows the manual to the letter. The philosopher Schopenhauer argued that much of human suffering stems from our inability to be at peace in our own room. We're always seeking validation and distraction in the eyes of others. Your constant availability is a manifestation of this escape. You keep yourself occupied with other people's problems so you don't have to face the deafening silence of your own. It's easier to be the hero of someone else's story than the reluctant protagonist of your own. And so, you become addicted to solving problems, to helping, to being needed. The needs of others become your drug, your reason for being. But every addiction has a price, and the price you pay is your own life. Your real life, with its dreams, its talents, its pains, is put on hold, waiting for the day you'll have time for it. But that day never comes, because the line of people needing a piece of you is endless. Nietzsche, with his brutal clarity, would speak of the will to power, not as a desire to dominate others, but as the fundamental impulse of every living being to grow, expand, surpass itself, and express its maximum strength in the world. By perpetually placing yourself at the service of others, you are committing the cardinal sin against your own will to power. You are living a reactive life, not an active one. You don't act, you react. You don't create, you repair. You don't advance, you sustain. And your soul, which yearns to soar, to create, to assert itself, languishes in a gilded cage of social approval. You are praised for your generosity, but inside you feel the bitter taste of stagnation. And the cruelest paradox of all is that this servitude doesn't even buy you the true love you so desperately desire. It buys you a utilitarian, fragile, and conditional form of affection. The day its usefulness ceases, affection will evaporate like mist in the sun. What you've built isn't a bond of love, but a service contract, with every clause written against you. Breaking this contract won't come from the other side. They're too comfortable in their position of receiving. The break needs to come from you, and it won't be an act of war, but an act of silence, an act of retreat. The conscious decision, for the first time, to not answer the summons, to let your phone vibrate until it goes silent, to observe from afar the small crisis your absence will generate, and to endure the discomfort of your own freedom. You believe you're in control. You believe your reactions, your concessions, are conscious choices made in the name of harmony or generosity. But the truth is darker and fundamentally simpler. Most of your emotional responses aren't choices. They're programs running in the background, installed in your psyche for so long that you've mistaken the software for your very soul. And those who understand this programming, even if only intuitively, manipulate you with frightening ease. Opportunistic people don't need to raise their voices. They don't need to threaten or force things. They simply find the buttons you've left exposed, the triggers of your guilt, your fear of abandonment, your need to be seen as good, and gently press them. And you react. Always the same way. The most effective control isn't that imposed by force, but that which is granted through ignorance. You're a prisoner unaware of their cell and, worse, who prides themselves on the efficiency with which they obey the guards. Carl Jung dedicated his life to mapping these invisible territories of the psyche. And one of his most powerful concepts for understanding this dynamic is projection. Projection is the unconscious psychological mechanism through which we attribute to others characteristics, feelings, or impulses that are our own, but which we cannot or do not want to recognize in ourselves. But there is another side to this phenomenon, one that is rarely discussed in the depth it deserves. While others project onto you, you, with your chronic availability, become the ideal receptacle for these projections. You become a blank canvas, perfectly smooth and inviting, for others to paint their own unresolved dramas. Think about it. That friend who seeks you out in crisis isn't seeking your wisdom. They're projecting onto you the figure of the savior, an archetype that absolves you of the responsibility of saving yourself. They don't relate to you, but to the role you play. That partner who demands your constant attention doesn't love you for your individuality. They love you for your individuality. He projects onto you the figure of the mother, the unconditional source of emotional nourishment that he may never have had, and subtly punishes you whenever you dare to have a world of your own. You are unloved. You are used as a character in a play that isn't yours. And why do you accept this role? Why do you go on stage every night to perform a script that exhausts you? Because you're afraid. Afraid of disappointment. Afraid of not being loved. Afraid of being abandoned if you show who you truly are, with your needs, your limits, and your anger. The most effective manipulation doesn't happen in shouting, but in the silence of guilt it instills. It happens when you feel you owe the other person something, when you believe you need to be available, that you need to help, that you need to understand, even if it destroys you inside. But what if your usefulness is the smokescreen that hides their emptiness? Herein lies the central point that needs to be dissected with a surgeon's precision. The manipulator doesn't need to control you. He just needs you to keep reacting the same way. He relies on your predictability. His game is one of stimulus and response. He pokes you with veiled criticism, and you react with a long and exhausting self-justification. He presents you with a problem, and you respond with an immediate solution. He demonstrates fragility, and you react with a wave of care and protection. He gives you crumbs of affection, and you react with disproportionate gratitude. He knows your choreography by heart. He is the conductor of a one-piece orchestra. You. But what happens when the musician decides to stop playing? What happens when the stimulus is given, but there is no response? The game breaks down. The system collapses. When you start saying no without explanation, responding with silence, withdrawing instead of justifying yourself, the projections that have been cast upon you begin to rebound. The mask they placed on his face, that of savior, of caregiver, of solver, falls to the ground and shatters. And this leaves people deeply disturbed, because suddenly they no longer know who you are. The predictability that was the basis of their control has disappeared, but the most devastating effect is another. Now, without your screen to absorb their projections, they are forced to look at themselves. And not everyone is prepared for what they see in the mirror. Your unavailability becomes an existential threat to the other person, because it forces the manipulator to confront their own emptiness, their own neediness, their own emotional incompetence. The silence you offer reveals the inner noise they've spent their entire lives trying to drown out with their noise, their presence, their energy. And then, inevitably, comes the attack, comes the criticism, comes the emotional drama. They will accuse you of selfishness, of coldness, of having changed. And they'll be right. You have changed. You've gone from being a convenient mirror to a window into a reality they don't want to face. Could it be that your constant presence isn't what's keeping them from finding themselves? Jung taught us that we do not become enlightened by imagining figures of light, but by making darkness conscious. By withdrawing, by stopping feeding the vicious cycle of projection and reaction, you are not only saving yourself, you are, paradoxically, offering the other the only real chance for growth they will ever have: the opportunity to deal with their own shadow. Your unavailability is the most radical gift you can give someone who has grown accustomed to living at your expense. It is a gift that will most likely be met with anger and resentment, for awareness is painful. But what about you? Are you ready to deal with the discomfort of being misunderstood, rejected, or even attacked for protecting yourself? Are you ready to endure the silence that sets in after the rupture? A silence that, at first, may seem like loneliness, but which is, in fact, the sound of your own soul returning home? Because it is precisely in this silence, in this space that you reclaim, that a new kind of power is born. A power that comes not from the ability to please, but from the courage to be. A power that is not measured by the number of people who need you, but by the quality of your own presence. Are you ready to face the fury of a man who has just lost his reflection? The modern world is noisy. It doesn't just whisper, it screams. The culture of productivity, incessant connection, and constant visibility has convinced you that silence is a void to be filled and loneliness a disease to be cured. You've learned to associate value with activity, to confuse being busy with being important. But this is one of the most sophisticated traps of the collective psyche. There is a power the world's noise doesn't want you to discover, a strength that resides not in your ability to respond, but in your courage to be silent. Not the silence of passivity or cowardice, but conscious, strategic, brutally lucid silence. The kind of silence that is not absence, but amplified presence. Carl Jung saw silence not as a vacuum, but as fertile ground for inner transformation. When you stop reacting, you begin to observe. And in observing, you see patterns that previously went unnoticed, hidden by the fog of your reactivity. The emotional repetitions, the manipulative games, the cycles of self-sabotage. Everything becomes clear, like objects at the bottom of a lake whose waters have finally calmed. Silence grants you lucidity. And lucidity is dangerous for those who have built their castle of power on the shaky ground of their confusion. Have you ever noticed how certain people panic when you don't respond, when you don't explain yourself, when you simply disappear from their emotional radar? It's not because they miss you. It's because your silence robs them of control of the narrative. While you speak, while you justify yourself, you're still inside their chessboard, moving the pieces they expect you to move. But when you remain silent, you turn the board. You change the rules of the game. And this unbalances anyone who thrives on their reaction. True silence isn't the absence of a voice. It's mastery over one's own energy. It's the refusal to be drawn into the center of another person's emotional hurricane. It's the conscious choice not to engage in battles that aren't worth the effort. Jung asserted that the process of individuation, the act of becoming who you truly are, requires this detachment. Because only in silence can you hear yourself without the deafening interference of the world. But make no mistake, this silence comes at a price. It will alienate you from people who only valued you for the role you played. It will make you incomprehensible to those who only saw you through the lens of their own projections. It will make you seem cold, distant, perhaps even arrogant. But all of this is just the reaction of those who never wanted to deal with their depth, only their usefulness. And here's the hard truth that needs to be faced. The more you mature, the more selective you become with your words. Because you come to understand that every sentence you speak is an energetic investment, and not everyone deserves access to your inner treasure. Sometimes, silence isn't retreat. It's sovereignty. It's the language of those who no longer need to prove anything to anyone. Silence is uncomfortable for others because it forces them to deal with their own thoughts, with their own inner noise. And this discomfort reveals more about them than any argument you could. You don't need to explain your absence. It explains itself. And those who feel threatened by it reveal how much they depended on your imbalance to maintain control over them. Think of the natural world, the source of all true analogies. A lion, the apex of the food chain, doesn't expend its energy chasing butterflies. It rests, it observes, it conserves its strength for the decisive moment. His presence is defined more by what he doesn't do than by what he does. His economy of movement is the source of his power. Now, think of a prey animal. It lives in a state of hypervigilance, reacting to every twig that breaks, every shadow that moves. Its energy is constantly drained by fear and reactivity. Which of these two archetypes have you embodied in your life? Have you been the lion, sovereign over your own energy, or the gazelle, racing from one imaginary threat to another, always on the verge of exhaustion? Your constant availability has placed you in the position of prey. You react to everything, and because of this, you become predictable and huntable. Strategic withdrawal, silence, is your first step out of the open plain and find the safety of your own strength. It is the act of becoming a predator of your own attention, deliberately choosing where to invest it. There is a famous experiment in social psychology conducted by Solomon Asch in the 1950s. Groups of people were invited to participate in a vision test. In each group, only one person was the actual subject of the experiment. The others were actors instructed to give incorrect answers. The test was simple. Show them a line and then 3 other lines, and ask which of the 3 was the same length as the first. The answer was obvious, unequivocal. However, when the actors, one by one, gave the wrong answer, more than a third of the real subjects in the experiment, even seeing the truth with their own eyes, agreed with the majority. They denied the evidence of their senses to avoid feeling excluded from the group. This experiment is a frightening portrait of your life. How many times have you said yes when your instincts screamed no? How many times have you smiled and agreed to something that violated your values just to keep the peace? How many times have you felt uncomfortable in a situation, but convinced yourself it was all in your head because everyone else seemed normal? Each of these moments was a little ash experiment, and in each of them, you chose the comfortable lie of belonging over the solitary truth of your own perception. Your over-availability is a chronic form of conformity. It's the fear of being the only dissenting voice in the room. By withdrawing, by creating space, you're not just resting, you're recalibrating your internal compass. You're relearning to trust what you see, what you feel, regardless of what the noisy majority around you is saying. But the most powerful silence isn't the one that disturbs others. It's the silence that rebuilds you from within. The silence that connects you to something beyond external approval. It's in this inner space, free from the demands of others, that you begin to recover your vital energy, to reconnect with your essence. And this is where true alchemy begins. It's not enough to simply cut out the external noise. You need to relearn how to use your energy consciously, to choose where it goes, where it stays, and, most importantly, where it should never be wasted again. It's time to learn to be selective with your own soul. There's no point understanding all this intellectually if, in practice, you remain the same person. Consciousness without action is just a more sophisticated form of self-deception, an opiate for the soul that gives you the illusion of progress while you remain chained in the same place. True transformation, the one that shakes the foundations of your reality, begins when you decide, with a firmness bordering on violence, to become selective. And this requires something wellness culture rarely mentions: emotional discipline. Conscious unavailability isn't about being cold, arrogant, or indifferent. It's about ceasing to be a public resource, accessible to anyone, at any time, for any reason. It's about taking back control of your own energy, your time, your peace. And this starts with small actions, almost imperceptible to the world, but seismic to your psyche. It's not responding immediately. It's taking a deep breath before reacting. It's leaving an argument before it drags you into chaos. It's hanging up the phone without feeling the pang of guilt. It's saying, "Today, I can't. I'm not interested. I'm not going to get involved." But here's the most important part, the watershed that separates the seeker from the master. You don't need to justify your absence. You don't need to explain your silence. You owe absolutely nothing to anyone except yourself. And that, for many people, is unforgivable. Because when you refuse to explain, you remove the other person's power to keep you within an emotional narrative where you're always the helpful one, the understanding one, the accessible one. You break the script they've written for you. Carl Jung understood that every process of individuation goes through a period of isolation. But not a depressive isolation, but a sacred isolation. A time of inner retreat where you relearn to hear your own voice without the interference of the world. Where you rebuild your identity not based on the gaze of others, but from within. Want an infallible thermometer for your evolution? Observe who starts to distance themselves from you when you become more reserved. Observe who tries to provoke you when you stop reacting. Observe who accuses you of changing when you finally start to protect yourself. These aren't signs that you're wrong. They're proof that you've begun to free yourself. Unavailability is uncomfortable at first. You'll feel guilty. You'll think you're being selfish. You'll hear that you're being too harsh. But this is part of the deconstruction process. You've spent your entire life being conditioned to put yourself second. It's natural for change to cause discomfort, not just in you, but in everyone who benefited from the old version of you. Conscious unavailability is the foundation of self-determination. When you say no to the world, you're saying a resounding yes to yourself. When you remove yourself from a toxic environment, you're reaffirming that your peace is worth more than any false connection. And when you stop explaining yourself, you begin to be respected, even if only by a few. And this is where the tension builds, because not everyone is ready for this new kind of presence. Your emotional absence will expose wounds they don't want to face. It will reveal how much they depended on your emotional chaos to feel in control. And it's at this moment that the rupture happens, and with the breakup comes pain, loneliness, and estrangement. The feeling that you're losing something, when in fact, you're just breaking free. Imagine a climber ascending a treacherous mountain, tethered to others by a single rope. For years, he's been the one pulling, the one ensuring everyone's safety, often carrying the extra weight of those who hesitated. He's grown accustomed to the effort, the muscle pain, the sense of responsibility. But one day, he realizes something terrible. Some of the other climbers aren't climbing. They're just being dragged along. They've become dead weight, relying entirely on his strength to reach the summit. At that moment, he has a choice. Continue pulling, risking everyone's weight dragging them into the abyss, or cut the rope. The decision to cut the rope is an apparent act of violence. To those left behind, it will seem like betrayal, selfishness. But to the climber, it's the only possible act of self-preservation and, paradoxically, of respect. He can't carry anyone to the top. Each person must make their own climb. Your life is this mountain, and you have been that climber. Now, you stand before the rope. The scissors are in your hand. What will you do? Cutting the rope doesn't mean wishing harm on others. It means recognizing that your journey is your own. It means understanding that you can't save anyone, especially those who don't want to be saved. The turning point in your psyche happens when you realize that the guilt you feel isn't a sign you're doing something wrong, but rather the sound of chains breaking. It's the echo of your old programming, fighting to keep you imprisoned. Guilt is the alarm of the system you're about to deactivate. Instead of running from it, you need to face it. Look at it and say, I see you. I know what you're trying to do, but I don't obey you anymore. When you stand your ground, even with the guilt screaming in your ears, something changes. The guilt loses its power. It becomes just background noise, no longer the driving force behind your decisions. And then you discover a new sensation: relief. The lightness of not carrying the world on your shoulders. The freedom to breathe without the weight of other people's expectations. It's at that moment that you realize that the loneliness you so feared isn't a void, but a space. A space for yourself. A space to discover who you are when you're not busy being everything to everyone. But what happens after that? What comes after distance? What is born from silence? It's rebirth, which only happens when you have the courage to be misunderstood, to be alone, and to become whole on your own. It's time to understand why the solitude of the strong is the path to true freedom. When you stop being available to everyone, something profound and initially frightening begins to happen. First, there's silence. An uncomfortable silence that seems to scream inside you. You wonder if you did the right thing, if you're being too harsh, if you're losing people who cared about you. But gradually, this silence transforms. It begins to cleanse, to soothe, to heal. And then loneliness sets in. But not the loneliness of absence. It's the loneliness of total presence, your own. The loneliness of the strong. The loneliness of those who no longer betray themselves to keep others close. And in this space, where there was once confusion, clarity enters. Where there was once anxiety, peace enters. Where there was once need, a new kind of strength enters. The strength of being whole within yourself. Carl Jung said that the process of individuation, of becoming who you truly are, requires you to distance yourself from the collective, to disidentify from the mask, to walk alone for a time. And that's exactly what you're doing when you decide to make yourself unavailable. You are not escaping the world. You are returning to yourself. It's at this point that you stop being a reactor and become a creator. You stop being shaped by circumstances and begin to shape your reality from within. People who feel uncomfortable with your absence reveal that they never wanted you. They wanted the role you played. And now that you no longer fit in, they don't know what to do with you. And this is liberating. You will lose people, but you will find yourself. You will distance yourself from places, but you will reconnect with your essence. You will become misunderstood, but ultimately, you will begin to be respected. Because when you are no longer available for anything, you become valuable, rare, unforgettable. And make no mistake, this is a rebirth, a new beginning, the beginning of a life where you are no longer available for emotional crumbs, for mind games, for emptiness disguised as affection. Now, you only accept what resonates with your peace, with your truth, with your wholeness. But how do you navigate this new inner geography? How to transform this philosophy into a daily practice? The first step is to reinterpret solitude. Society has taught you to fear loneliness, to see it as a social failure. But the solitude that follows your withdrawal is not a punishment. It's a sanctuary. It's your alchemical laboratory. It's the sacred space where you can, for the first time, hear your own thoughts without being interrupted by the opinions of others. Your first practical task is to learn to inhabit this space. Start with small periods. 10 minutes a day without your phone, without music, without distractions. Just you and the silence. At first, it will be chaos. Your mind, addicted to stimuli, will scream for distraction. Anxious thoughts, guilt, fears, they will all surface. Don't fight them. Just observe. Imagine you're sitting by a river, and these thoughts are leaves drifting in the current. You see them, but you don't jump into the river to grab them. This practice, repeated daily, strengthens a psychic muscle that had been atrophied, your ability to be your own companion. You are learning to feel at home in your own skin. The second step is rediscovering your core. When you lived for others, your identity was defined by your roles: the good friend, the helpful child, the understanding partner. Now, those roles are gone, and in their place, there's a space. Who are you when you're not serving? To find out, you need to become an archaeologist of your own soul. Grab a notebook and start digging. What did you love to do as a child, before the world told you what was useful or productive? What interests have you abandoned because you didn't have time, or because you thought they weren't important? What secret curiosities do you harbor but never allowed yourself to explore? Start dedicating time to these things, not because they'll take you anywhere, but simply because they spark a spark of life. It could be learning an instrument, painting, walking in nature, reading about an obscure subject. These aren't hobbies, they're rituals of reconnection. Every time you engage in an activity that nourishes you without any external validation, you're filling that space that was once occupied by the need to please. You are building an identity that stands on its own. The third and most challenging step is renegotiating your relationships. Some ties will have been naturally severed, but others will remain, and they will need to be transformed. The people who remain in your life after your move are the ones who have the potential for a true connection. But they need to learn the new rules, and you are the one who must teach them, not with words, but with consistent actions. This means establishing and maintaining firm boundaries. When you say no, the no is final. It is not the beginning of a negotiation. When you need space, you take it unapologetically. When something hurts you, you communicate it clearly and calmly, not as an accusation, but as information about your inner territory. When you do this, I feel this way. Period. Some will resist. They will try to pull you back into old patterns. But if you hold firm, two things will happen. Either they will adapt to your new way, and the relationship will deepen to a level of mutual respect you've never known. Or they'll walk away altogether, proving that their connection was conditional on your submission. In either case, you win. Think of the butterfly's metamorphosis. Inside the cocoon, the caterpillar disintegrates completely. It becomes a primordial soup, a chaos of undifferentiated cells. There is nothing that resembles its former form. It is a process of total annihilation. If you could see inside, you would think it was death. But it is in this chaos, in this lonely darkness, that the imagination of a new form begins to organize. The butterfly is not an improved caterpillar. It is an entirely new being, operating under a different set of laws. It can fly. The caterpillar could not. It feeds on nectar. The caterpillar fed on leaves. Its transformation was not an adjustment. It was a transmutation. The process you are going through is your cocoon. The pain, the loneliness, the confusion, all of this is the sound of your former identity dissolving. You must trust this process. You must resist the temptation to emerge prematurely, to become a caterpillar again because the darkness is too frightening. The promise is that if you stay in the process, if you inhabit your silence, if you reconnect with your core, and if you reset your bonds, you will emerge. And you won't be a stronger version of yourself. You will be an entirely new being. If you've made it this far, it's because a part of you is already ready for this new journey. A part of you has already understood that being loved means nothing if it means abandoning yourself. And that true self-love begins when you choose yourself, even if it means being alone for a while. The journey is yours and no one else's. It requires courage, discipline, and an unshakable faith in your right to exist on your own, not as an appendage in someone else's life. Now, I ask you, are you ready to be misunderstood, rejected, or even hated in the name of your inner freedom? Are you willing to pay the price of being you? If this message touched you, if it resonated with you, write in the comments, "I choose my peace." Even if you don't want to identify yourself, comment anonymously. Let's see how many here are ready for this transition. And don't forget to like this video, share it with someone who needs to hear it, and subscribe to the channel to continue this journey of deepening. Keep watching the next video. It's important, much more than you can imagine.